Tell Us About Yourself is sponsored by bonusround.ca, streaming Canada's classic game shows on demand. Dive into the golden age of television with thousands of episodes of Canadian series that defined an era from anywhere in the world, all for just $1.99 a month. From iconic shows like Let's Make a Deal and Definition to cult classics like Bumper Stumpers and The Mad Dash, bonusround.ca brings you timeless entertainment that's fun, enlightening, and affordable. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, relive the magic of Canadian television history. Subscribe now at bonusround.ca for $1.99 and turn every night into game show night. By Game Show Forensics. Join host Robert McKee and his crack team of forensic game show scientists as they take you on the deepest dives imaginable in a quest to analyze the most detailed minutia of game shows nobody else dares to, or cares to, investigate. Nothing is too whimsical for examination, no semantics too absurd for the research extremists at GameShowForensics.com. Parental discretion is advised. And by The Inn at Leola Village. Nestled in the heart of picturesque Pennsylvania, the Inn at Leola Village is a sanctuary of luxury and relaxation. Indulge in the timeless beauty of their historic suites, each meticulously designed to transport you to a bygone era of elegance and grace. Experience the culinary delights of their award-winning Italian restaurant, where every dish is a masterpiece crafted from the finest local ingredients. From romantic getaways to corporate retreats, the Inn at Leola Village offers a haven for every occasion. Unwind at the spa, stroll through the lush gardens, and let the stress of everyday life melt away. Make your reservation today at theinnatleolavillage.com or call the front desk at area code 717-656-7002. The Inn at Leola Village, an oasis of luxury. Tell Us About Yourself. Conversations with Game Show Contestants is produced in partnership with the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, one of the largest history museums in the United States, and one of the leading museums serving families with highly interactive exhibits and programs. Since 1968, the Strong Museum has been dedicated to exploring the ways in which play encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. And their National Archives of Game Show History. Founded by industry veterans Bob Bowden and Howard Blumenthal, the archive is home to thousands of artifacts representing over 80 years of broadcasting, including props, set designs, video interviews with game show professionals, and other iconic elements from the history of television at play. For more information about the National Archives of Game Show History or the Strong National Museum of Play, visit museumofplay.org or call area code 585-263-2700.
Blue 35.
Tell us about yourself, would you?
Tell us something about you.
For any new viewers, won't you tell us again about yourself?
We've met before, but let's meet again. Tell us about
What
yourself.
else can you tell us about yourself?
Perhaps you'd fill us in again and tell us about yourself.
Oh my God. Stuff me in. Cough. Baby, I'm sorry. I'm gonna take a chance on this. Final answer.
Oh, Ogie. You could have had 250. Instead, you have 500.
Hi there, I'm Ogie Ogas. I live in Newton, Massachusetts, and I write books for a living. I'm a mathematical neuroscientist, but I spend all my time these days writing books about the mind mostly, and about autism.
So, Dr. Ogas, typically I begin these conversations. I've talked to a lot of contestants over the past year or so in which I've been doing this podcast, and I love to start by finding out what role game shows played in the contestant's life growing up before they became a contestant. How important were game shows to you before you had your experiences on Millionaire and on Grand Slam? Were you a game show fan?
No, not particularly. In high school, I grew up in Maryland, and we have a long-running, I think it's still running, though maybe in a smaller format. We have a high school quiz show called It's Academic. And it's schools in Maryland and Virginia and Washington, D.C. all compete. And so I competed in that in high school. And my school had never gone very far in this tournament, but I was on the team in the junior and senior years. And that we got all the way to the championships, the championship round both times, which our school had never even got out of the first round. And so that was an exposure to, I guess, to game shows. It was really an academic quiz show. So I had that background, but TV game shows, no, was nothing of particular interest to me.
But it sounds like maybe trivia, general knowledge were areas of interest when you were in high school that maybe led to that experience.
I really wanted to win on It's Academic, but, well, let me actually, I can introduce. To know my story of game shows, have to know something about me, and that's that I'm autistic, and sort of my relationship to game shows is all of it is through the lens of autism. And I don't want to foul up your approach, but it's good to talk about this. My sense of mind in high school, because I think I have a very interesting story. My whole relationship to game shows, I suspect, is going to be different than many other contestants.
I would love to hear about it.
And that's because, so if you don't mind, maybe I can ramble a little bit. And then you can, if I'm leaving anything out you'd like to know, please go ahead and ask. I'm happy to talk. But I just feel like this is so important. And, if you're asking questions about trivia and things like that, you really need to know about my autism. And here's why it matters so much.
Sure.
It's because I have terrible memory. I have terrible memory for trivia. I have terrible episodic memory. After my game show experiences, everybody thought I'm great at trivia. When you're asking, hey, in high school, you probably were great at trivia. No, but I don't know trivia at all. So like at pubs, people want me on the trivia team. I always say, listen, you're making a mistake. And I get in the team and they're always shocked at how little trivia I know. It's because I have terrible memory. And so because I have terrible memory, it's fortunately my autism balances this poor memory with the ability to learn massive quantities of information and keep it in my head for a short period of time. By short, the order of weeks. 2 months is probably the limit, and now that I'm a little older, I don't even think I could get that far. But back in my prime, I could hold on. I could put anything into my head. I still can, any quantity, volume of stuff, and hold it there. But then it fades. I can't hold it past about 2 months. So basically, I can train up. Well, it turns out I can train up to be as good as the very best people in the world. Because I'd love to talk about. Eventually, got on Grand Slam and got all the way to the finals against Ken Jennings. And so I'm sure that would be interesting to talk about. But
absolutely,
let me talk about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire first. That was the first show I was on.
Sure, and I want to get into the details of the show, but I'm fascinated by this. So, as a result of your autism, you are able to digest large amounts of information and retain them, but only for a short period of time. I would love to know how that came into play in your schooling, how that came into play when you were practicing for its academic. How have you, other than the game shows, how have you leveraged this ability to your advantage?
Well, it's central to my research and science career. For example, the first book I published was about the sexual brain, and I did research, really groundbreaking, pioneering research on human sexuality, the most sophisticated and comprehensive study of human sexual desire since Alfred Kinsey, and we absolutely dwarfed what he had done way back in the 1940s and 50s. Hopefully, we dwarfed somebody after that long of a time. But in order to do that research, I had to basically learn assimilate massive quantities of data about human sexuality. Because I'm autistic, it also wasn't an emotional experience. That sounds like, people say that, well, that must have been grossed you out completely, or that must have been a tough time. But it's just how my autistic brain works. I can put anything in there. So we learned massive quantities of facts. Our source of data was the internet. We did our research at a unique moment in time where we were able to get huge quantities of data about people's sexual activities online. It's much harder to get that now, and plus people have changed. But anyway, we used that data to learn about the sexual brain, but it was a massive amount of data, equivalent to what I learned for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, for example. That's why I brought this example up. It was much like, it reminded me of that. And I do that often in my life. My Who Wants to Be a Millionaire experience, actually, I realized that I could systematize this ability, to do research like I did on human sexuality. I've also studied other parts of the brain too, like the consciousness. I have a mathematical understanding of consciousness, that I got there between this massive digestion of facts as well. So, yeah, I used it to my advantage in high school. I didn't know at the time. In high school, I didn't understand any of this. I was weird. It's kind of how many autistic people are. I was just weird. But in high school, I clearly was using this ability and didn't know it. And then I got frustrated because I tried out for the equivalent of its academic team at MIT. I ended up going to MIT, and that was only a year later. And like I failed completely. Like I was not competitive at all. And I remember being baffled. Like I was just in the championships, in Maryland, Virginia, DC. There's some great schools there. And how can I be the worst person in the room? Here, just 1 year later. It's because I don't retain anything. That should have been a clue, but I didn't think there was something wrong with my brain. I was baffled by this. So, at any rate, I went to graduate school to study mathematical neuroscience, to understand my brain and to understand autism. And one of the things I studied in graduate school was memory and models of memory, mathematical models of memory. And I spent all my time thinking about memory. And so two kinds of things converged to get me on Millionaire. The first was like spending all this time thinking about memory, at a graduate level, in a scientific way. And the other is, because I'm autistic, I can't hold down a job. I can't have a boss. I can't go to an office. I can't do 9 to 5. My autism prevents any of that stuff. And I was realizing, oh my God, I'm not going to ever be able to work a job well enough to get any decent amount of money. I better find some way to come up with some big chunk of cash that I can use as a nest egg and just live off that and have a life. So I looked around and I was like, okay, what do I see in the world where I can earn, a whole lot of cash really fast, besides drug dealing, and I thought, oh, game shows. And I thought, hey, all I need is a show like Jeopardy or Millionaire that has a lot of structure to it, a lot of history to it. And I decided Millionaire was the better shot. And
why? Why was Millionaire a better shot than Jeopardy? What made that more of an access point for you?
It was an easier path to $1 million. 15 questions versus 15 questions of Jeopardy may not even win you the game.
Sure.
So
sure.
So it's like if I learn enough, and I don't want to be pressing the button. Like I didn't I didn't want to be doing that. I just wanted memory. I wanted my mind in action. And it just seemed like pure, and you had all the time you wanted to answer, so you could use any memory trick you wanted. It just seemed tailor-made for my memory skills and what I was looking for. And also at this time, it had just gone to the daytime, and so there wasn't that fire round. That fire round, I don't remember what it was called.
Right, the fastest figure where we had the 10 qualifying contestants.
The fastest figure.
Right.
So I wouldn't have liked that, because maybe I wouldn't have got out of that, and so that was another thing is you got straight on. If you get on the show, you get to go on. So I was like, that's the thing for me. And the final thing, which was huge, in fact, it was essential, was the internet had there was a bulletin board about game shows, and people had posted all the questions ever asked for Millionaire, like a database. So this was my thing at the time, analyzing that kind of thing. So it was quickly sorted into categories, prioritized categories by the frequency on the show. I knew my own strengths and weaknesses, so I used that to kind of develop basically an approach to studying that maximized, my rate of learning, with all these factors coming into play. And it was a dynamic model. And so basically I just went to work with my autistic brain for 6 weeks and, try to learn everything I thought they could ask on the show. I went and tried out, I passed. I do remember it was like Scantron sheets, and they're right in front of us. They put them through. We didn't know whose were whose, but I finished. I thought I got them all, and they were all going through. And it's like, and then there was one that went, and I was like, yeah, I think that's probably me. And then and then I got the call. I was confident because I had all that in my head, when I went in there, so I was like, even if there's great trivia people here, I have it at my fingertips for this moment, I'm supercharged for as long as this lasts. So, then you wait for the call. So I was pretty confident they were going to put me on.
And what gave you that confidence? Because, in talking to a lot of contestants, one of the challenges is not only knowing the game and knowing how to play the game, but passing the interview portion, proving to the contestant coordinator that you are telegenic and talkative, and you'll play the game in a way that translates well to TV and will make people want to watch. How nervous were you for the social aspect of the audition process? The game sounds like you have it down pat. I want to know a little bit more about your strategy when it comes to studying, and we'll get to that, but I'd love to know how you approached the interview, how you approached that social aspect of the audition.
So ironically, you might think the autism would cause me problems on the social interview. And if it was a job interview, for sure, I'm terrible at job interviews. But this was a performance interview. And, because I'm autistic, I'm strange, and people always react to me as strange. And I knew I just turned that up and I'll be telegenic. And that's exactly what happened. So again, it's hilarious because, if they were interviewing me for an actual job, I would have got nervous and said all the wrong things. But then I was just like, okay, here's a place I get to be myself. I'll just be my autistic self. And, I know that's kind of strange, but it's, commanding when it's on. And yeah, Michael Davies liked it.
Right. Well, I can see that. And Ogie, I don't think it's strange at all, because, I'm sitting here listening to you tell me how this opportunity materialized for you, and I'm finding myself fascinated because I feel like I can follow the threads of what you're thinking. I very much relate to the dynamic by which people can just say what they're thinking, very stream of consciousness, and it comes across in your performance on the show as well. I mean, there are points where you're sort of thinking out loud to yourself and saying things out loud like, oh, who the hell would use heroin for a stuffy head? And it gets a laugh, but that's clearly you thinking out. That's clearly you thinking out loud. And it's a fascinating process to hear. Tell me how you study. You tell me that you gather large amounts of information, you could sort of internalize them, and they eject from that cassette player in your head at some point. But by what method do you internalize that information? Is it something where you can just read and sort of photographically memorize things, or is it by repetition? How do you do that?
So the physical technique is, well, as I said, first I had organized this database of questions, by categories, all customized to fit both the show and my own mind. What I mean by that is, for example, I knew zero pop culture because I didn't have a TV, and I'm not a person other than movies. I love movies, but my movies was pretty much my only window into anything pop culture. And so I knew that was a tremendous weakness of mine. And I knew I would never get great at it. So my goal there was just to be able to get out of up to 25,000, there's kind of three levels on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. The first level, you should really get them all without breaking a sweat. The second
the funny
level,
questions, the first 5, they get the laugh or the last answer, that kind of thing. They're meant to
exactly.
Right.
And then the second, again, you really, if you're going for the million, you really should get through the next 5 also without breaking a sweat, without having any chance of getting the wrong. And then, the money questions is the real game, So I just went to my pop culture enough to get me to the money questions. I knew I'd have to punt or do something on a pop culture question in the final 5, but my goal was just enough to get, but before I did that, I may have on the, one of the first 5 questions, if it was like, something about Madonna or something like, pop culture
right.
like that.
Right. Well, and I appreciated, in watching your performances back in 2006. And like I mentioned before we started recording, I saw the episode back when it aired because I was a massive fan of the show, and I got to be a contestant years later, but I also watched your episode much more recently. And one of the things I appreciated about the way you played the game was you were very careful. When I look back on my performance on the show, while I was careful enough to take something away, I do wish that I had focused more on the game than the show aspect. I think I hammed it up. I think I was taken by the surroundings, by the cameras, by the audience. It's hard to not feel energized by that. And I think that my performance as far as the game was concerned suffered a little bit as a result. What I loved was the road metaphor. You should know these, but you want to back out of the driveway. Sometimes you hit the mailbox, but you want to make sure you back out before you hit the road. And I really appreciated the way that you went about those first few questions, because yes, they are meant to be easy. They're meant to, get you to that $1,000 safe haven so that the real part of the game can continue. But it was, I loved that. I just loved how careful you were. And then the carefulness sort of melted away.
I was very deliberately careful because I'm autistic. I sometimes I'll get impulsive, or I'll act before I think about it, and I was just terrified I would be too sure of an answer on those first 5, and so I really was focused on, all right, don't jump too fast. Don't jump too fast.
Sure. At any point in that first leg of the game, were you at all concerned about embarrassing yourself on TV? That was one of my big fears, was that I'd be one of those $0 winners and I would embarrass myself. Did that come into play at all, or by your nature, is that not something that you concern yourself with?
I was on to get the million. I had trained. Everything was going according to plan. So I left out. I got the call, and I think it was 2 months before the show, and so that I spent 2 months, following the plan, and so I was fully ready to go when I walked in there and expecting, ready to win $1 million. That's what I was after. I also trained in other ways. For the phone a friend, I wanted that to be 100% guarantee. So I worked with my another graduate student at the time. He's my best friend, and I've written 2 books with him, including I did the research on sex with him. He was also my, in addition to being my sex research partner, he was my phone a friend on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he built. This was 2005, I guess, is when they taped it. or maybe it was early 2006. I can't quite remember. But whenever it was, Google was still super duper simplistic. And what we wanted was like, well, to be honest, like Google today, like if you do a search now, you get like, there's like a Wikipedia answer, there's like another answer, like all these different answers pop up in front of you. That didn't exist back then, but basically my partner, Sai, built all that. He built algorithms. So he had a screen that was like basically today, the 2024 Google screen, but he had it in 2004. So when I called, the hard part we realized was you got to convert the question into a search string. And sometimes that's easy and obvious how to do it, but we know some of the questions are monsters, like questions where the version would be like, which of the following 4 people did not win a Grammy and an Emmy? Like there's no quick rail there. You got to list all 4 of them, and you got to find a way to
right. That's
get
4
that
search
string.
strings, right? Yeah.
So you got to figure out how to. But I in the chair need to format that in my head before I do the call, so I could spit it out perfectly and clearly. And so we practiced that, like really complicated, weird search strings and questions. And it was good that we did it because the actual question ended up being a tricky one, a really, really tricky one.
30 seconds. Ogie, your time starts now.
Quote, 7-year itch, quote. Quote, see anything you like, quote, or, quote, isn't it delicious, quote, or, quote, want to join me, quote, or, quote, aren't you excited, quote, okay? Which one of those is in the movie 7-Year Itch? See anything you like? Isn't it delicious? Want to join me? Aren't you excited?
Isn't it delicious?
Did you hear what he said?
Yeah, I heard what he said.
What do you think he said? I just want to make sure.
Isn't it delicious? So I can either, I don't know if he was asking to repeat it or if he was giving me a on the buzzer answer. I could use the 50-50, but I want the million, so I'm gonna go with Sai Swami Dad and hope that Swami action in India's coming my way. So I'm gonna say B. Isn't it delicious? Final answer.
Oh boy. It's kind of paraphrasing, but Swami, how I love you, how I love you. You got it. Ogie has 100,000 going for $250,000.
I am taken by the ability to, on camera, under the pressure of time, because you have that 30-second clock for the phone a friend, I'm taken by that ability to convert the question into something that would yield a search result so quickly. And in watching that phone a friend segment, it's just incredible. The way that you could take a question and just break it down to its bare essentials. And again, while that clock is ticking, I don't know if people who have ever seen Millionaire realize this, and I don't know if this was the case for you, but you don't hear anything in the studio. You don't hear the music, but you do hear that clock. You do hear the ticking, and that sound combined with everybody staring at you, Meredith Vieira staring at you, the camera staring at you, it can be hard to process information. I'm fascinated by that.
So jumping ahead, this is kind of like we're going to revisit this at the climax of my Millionaire story.
Sure.
So I prepared for everything to do with the questions and having my mind ready to answer everything I guess people would consider cognitive. But what I didn't do any training or think about at all was the emotions. As you pointed out, the rather, dramatic, social effects of having, people 360 degrees around you. And,
yes.
You're in that tall chair, and they've designed the floor to be, even further, and the thump. There's always that thumping music.
Yes, nothing prepares you for that. It's and they don't prepare you. They don't even say, listen. They don't do anything to make you feel calm at any point. And yes, so I was super focused on what I had learned and trained, and I had a
a program. I had an agenda, so that held together for most of it. But when I got into the money questions, my lack of emotional preparation, it began to take a toll. And it took a toll first on the very question that I asked the phone a friend. But I'll get to that in a moment. Let me first finish up saying what I was doing to train for the show.
Yes, please.
I mentioned I had a study regime for the knowledge for the questions, and I trained with my buddy Cy on the phone a friend. He designed a Google interface. I also analyzed the Ask the Audience patterns, and this is crucial because one of the things I noticed when I was studying the patterns you see on the Ask the Audience was a double peak where there's one a bit higher than the other, and every time you see the double peak, it was always a trick question or a tricky question maybe where one seemed like an obvious answer to the audience, and a lot of the audience chose it. And then there was the correct question, and the lower peak was the correct question, and the higher peak was the tricky business question. And I knew that, I studied that, and I had that, in play, and that was, I would end up seeing that on the show, and so I'll talk about that. And I also, what else did I do for preparation? I think those were the big things. I think I put some thought into the fact that, you got to get through the first 10. Get to the $25,000 question and answer that without losing any to have a real chance. And then you have a full strategy of your 4 lifelines to use on 5 questions. And I kind of thought a lot about, game theory and how to play that out. So I had some mental preparation for that too. But as I said, no emotional preparation at all. And because I'm autistic, social situations are high intensity for me, and having people looking at me.
Millionaire is a show that captured my imagination. I know that you were not much of a game show person growing up. I think I am the exact polar opposite. I lived and breathed game shows, and I still do. So this show really captured my imagination. I feel like I've seen probably every episode, and there seems to be a pattern by which contestants use their lifelines, and I think I might have even done this as well. My lifelines were a little different, but it seems like back in the day, Ask the Audience was first, then it was Phone a Friend, then it was 50-50. That seemed to be, for whatever reason, the order in which contestants used it. Was your research into the data regarding Ask the Audience any impetus behind you saving that lifeline? Because you didn't use it first, did you?
I think that was the first one I used, and I originally was viewing that as a guaranteed answer. Like I wanted to feel the lifelines would be guarantees. So with Cy, we trained until, we got like 99% of our practice questions correct, and then we felt good enough. And so the audience, I looked at them all, and I felt like, I would only not know the answer under certain conditions, and then which of these conditions match these Ask the Audiences. So I put thought into. I knew it wasn't foolproof. I felt pretty foolproof with my buddy Cy, but I knew that Ask the Audience wasn't foolproof, but it should have been. I'd say I had like maybe 85% confidence. If I had 99% confidence with Cy, I had 85% confidence going into Ask the Audience. But that was before I experienced the emotional impact of being here in the studio.
Of course. You know what? This is my fault. I'm thinking of it in the wrong order because, of course, you used the audience first. But I think I'm confusing this with the idea that you saved a lot of your lifelines for later in the game. I think that's what I'm thinking about. Yeah, that you went many questions without using any of your help, to the point where you use your Ask the Audience, and Meredith said, Okie finally needs your help. And I think that's what I'm thinking about.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, because I got to the 100,000, I believe, before I had to use one, or maybe it was 50,000.
Yeah, I think it was 50,000. You used your phone a friend on the 100,000.
Yeah, I think it was 50.
Yeah, because $100,000 question was the Marilyn Monroe. What was she saying while her skirt blew up in that in that famous scene?
Yeah, so let me talk about that.
Yes,
that
please,
question, because
please.
I got on the show, and the first 10 questions went exactly according to plan. They were all easy. Nothing that, things I probably knew even without any practice or training, it had turned out. So very lucky. And it's luck. I'm the first to admit, like, the batch you get is super, it's so variable. And I had also noticed, I should have said during my studying, on the original show, the primetime show with Regis, all the questions were what I would consider facts. But on the daytime show, they always threw in what I would consider factoids. An example of a factoid is, last year, what was the most popular cookie in America? Like, you might know trivia. You might have, you look up what's the most popular cookie of all time, but to know, the most recent round, what's the most popular cookie, that's a lot harder to prepare for.
Sure.
That's like a shifting target. And they didn't have lots of them, but it seemed to me like they usually had 2 per show. They usually had one in the first 25, one up to the first 25,000, the first 10 questions. Usually had one there where you could usually, figure it out anyway. But then they often had one in the money questions where, there's not really any way you could expect to know that. That would be, you're going to lose that. And then even how can you trust the audience? Those factoid questions were killers. And so I feel like I got lucky because I don't think I had any factoid questions, any of those questions that I would consider factoids. So
I think the closest one to what you're describing was the question that you switched at the $500,000 level. It was, it was the question you switched at the $500,000 level. It was something to do with the Beatles. Which of them hadn't performed at the Jerry Lewis telethon? Which, in my mind, as soon as that question came up, I hoped that you would switch it, because it's not much of a multiple choice question. If you know the names of the Beatles, there's no help there. There's nothing to suss out, looking at the 4 choices. If you don't know it, there's no way to, figure it out by process of elimination. So I was glad that you switched that one. And again, owing to your lack of knowledge in pop culture, that was turned out to be a good choice.
Yes. The speaking of that question, see, I would consider that a fact question, very, very, very challenging one. That one deservedly at that level, I would say. But
sure.
See, that was one that I could have prepared for. Perhaps if I had a base of knowledge of pop culture, the way that I had a base of knowledge of say science and history and literature and more academic subjects. If I had started at that, maybe when I studied, I would have got to the level of, knowing something like that. But a factoid would have been like, what was Ringo's, favorite color socks, and something that was just in the most recent biography. Like, the only way you know it is if you read the most recent biography of him,
right,
something like that
right.
would be more of a factoid, where it's not part of the trivia canon. Like the Beatles on the telethon, I would even consider part of the general canon. Like, I could imagine that popping up on a Trivia Pursuit question too. That
yeah,
sort of thing.
I think when they talk about game shows and the questions that they ask, I think that's one of those types of questions where they say you either know it or you don't. There's no way to figure it out. It's either something you've heard or you've never heard it.
Yeah, absolutely. When there's 4, when there's 1 of 4, there's no absolute way to distinguish any of them in terms of how they'd be, on a telethon or not.
I want to go back for 1 second, Ogie, to the idea of the atmosphere fueling your performance, and maybe this is the case, maybe it isn't, but in watching your run on Millionaire, you start off very careful, like you said, very deliberate, making sure you're reading the question, reading the answers, taking your time giving the answers. And while you are careful throughout the game leading up to that $500,000 and eventually $1 million question, you visibly begin to bloom. You begin to come alive in front of this audience. Could you share some insight as to how the surroundings of a show like Millionaire could influence not only your performance, your telegenic ability, but also your decision-making process. Did that come into play at all? Were you feeling energized by the audience? And did that enable you to make that $500,000 gamble?
Well, so unfortunately, the audience affected me negatively, and so it finally came the social impact. And when I say social impact, I'm very specifically I'm autistic. I like, I don't like big groups.
Sure.
And I don't like to be looked at. In particular, it's a particularly uncomfortable feeling for me. And so, yeah, that was like not a pleasant situation. Like I'm not a publicity hound. I don't want to be in front of cameras. I don't want a bunch of cameras pointed at me.
Wow. So it really was the money that made you audition for Millionaire, because watching the show, being somebody who doesn't like crowds, I mean, you look at that show, and that show is a crowd. It is a 360-degree circle of people. You are sitting in the middle. That's seemingly something that in any other situation you would shy away from or otherwise just not enter into.
I wanted the million.
Yeah.
I wanted $1 million so I wouldn't have to get a 9-to-5 job, so I could,
Hell yeah, you wanted it bad. Wow.
Yeah. So I viewed it as my career, but not a career game show, but like if I could just get that, because I was living in, apartment to apartment, month to month my whole life, and I was like, there's no way I can earn enough to change this unless I with a big chunk of money that I could just use my nest egg, and so that's all that was on my mind. When I was studying, that's what I was focused on. I didn't think about the social element to my detriment, because so I got all the way to the money questions, which is exactly everything going to plan, and so I was feeling good, even though there's a social intensity and my emotions were jacked up. The adrenaline's pumping like caffeine, like locomotives in your bloodstream, and jacked up like I just drank 10 cups of coffee maybe.
Sure.
But I did it. Like I'm living the dream, right? So I've got this game plan. I'm fully prepared. I did it. I'm as crazy as it is now, I'm comfortable. Comfortable is not the word. I know what I'm dealing with. Yes, it's intense and crazy, but I just lasted 10 questions, intense and crazy, and here I am on the money questions, where each of these questions will make a difference in my life. Like 50,000. I'm still going to need a job, but at least, I can have some peace and quiet while I try to figure out what to do next.
Right.
100,000. Wow. That's still not fitting the job, but that again is going to increase the chances I can end up there. And then, 250,000, I thought that's the number where I might be able to set up a life where I can work on my own terms. It was sort of the goal, is just not having to rely on needing a job, a 9-to-5 job to get by. So I had very clear thought that's where my mind was, on that stuff, and there suddenly, I realized to my eternal detriment that you got to take the audience, the presence of a large crowd of people into consideration, not to mention all the production assistants and cameras rolling all around you, and the music and the lights flashing everywhere. Yeah,
sure.
All of that, the social, the lights. The heat of the action, it all finally hit me on the $50,000 question, the 11th question in the stack. And the question was Marilyn in the famous scene with Marilyn Monroe. I think they even said this from the 7-Year Itch. When the air blows up her skirt as she walks across the subway grate, what does she say? And so I saw that question, and I knew I've seen that film clip, of course, but I don't remember having ever heard audio accompanying it. So I knew there was zero chance of me. I didn't remember study it, and I never saw it. I knew it was not in my memory, so there was no memory trick I could do to try to retrieve it. So I knew I'd have to use a lifeline, and so I thought, oh, this is perfectly made for the audience because I just don't know pop culture. I bet this is a really easy one for just ordinary people that know ordinary. Ordinary pop culture knowledge. So I thought that's why I use the Ask the Audience, because this just seems tailor-made for an audience. And then I got the double peak that I had prepared for
from the audience.
But this was a new, So I asked the audience, and um, most of the audience chose, I think it was Like What You See, which sounds like something maybe that would be said in that circumstance, and that she did. So most of the audience chose that one. But there was another peak in the distribution of the audience responses, A, B, C, or D. So there was a peak for the letter A, which was See Anything You Like, and then there was another peak for Isn't It Delicious, and that peak was a little lower. So this was the double peak situation. I had studied for it. I knew that meant go with the lower peak. But up to this point, I had been answering trivia questions, and I had tons of confidence in my ability to answer trivia questions. But this was a different kind of thing. This was trusting, that I had done the right work on, understanding the Ask the Audience distribution. And I panicked. It was like, how can I trust this? I should have trusted it. I had prepared for it. It was the right thing. There was nothing different about it than any of the other times I had seen it. But in that moment, it was like, this isn't a memory thing. This is oh my God, am I really going to rely on the work I did? And I should have. I didn't. And so I reached for what I viewed as my guaranteed one, because I was like, I just got to get 50,000. I got to get the 50,000. And, I really shouldn't have wasted it. I had it. I could have kept my Ask the Audience for the higher question. And man, I'm certain I would have got the million. If I had, one more lifeline on the million, I would have got it, because we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah. So, looking at the question, I actually have it in front of me here. 40% of the audience said, See Anything You Like, and 38% said, Isn't It Delicious, which turned out to be the right answer. And you used what you said was your guaranteed lifeline, because you had your pal Cy with his Google from the future. He found the answer for you in 30 seconds, in just barely 30 seconds.
So I had to give him a search string that would allow him to locate, that video clip or a discussion of that film clip, or a discussion of the film clip, and somehow have a caption or audio for it. So it was basically like that was the challenge presented. How to render that as a search string.
Amazing,
and then transmit it to him. And he just got it. They cut him off as he started talking. He only got out one phoneme of his answer, but it was enough. It was enough to match it up with the correct answer. Isn't it delicious?
Amazing.
But, if we hadn't practiced like ceaselessly, ridiculously, preposterously, we really did, like that. We got the most challenging, search string question you could have asked for, and we got it with literally, half second to spare. So I got through the $50,000 question, but blew two lifelines: my Ask the Audience and my phone a friend. Thankfully, my phone a friend Cy saved the day. Came through. I promised him 10% of the dollar value of any question that they got asked on. So he got $5,000 out of the deal.
Wonderful.
So $5,000 he said for waiting around for a full day, because if you're a phone a friend, you have to be on the standby.
That's true. Yep, they have you there all day.
Even give the show.
Absolutely.
What he said, he'll take that for a day's work.
Sure.
So got to the $100,000 question, and I guess I got that one. And then I don't remember what it was. Do you know? Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, 100,000. Actually, 100,000 was the Marilyn Monroe question. 50,000. Which of these well-known national organizations does not feature the word association in its full title? And you had a bunch of acronyms: ASPCA, YMCA, and
that was worth 50,000.
That was the $50,000 question. Yeah. Yep.
In my memory, that was the $25,000 question. Oh gosh, I got lucky. That was a question that could have been in the first 10 questions. That wasn't really a money question, so I got lucky there.
Yeah. The 25,000 was about ethylene glycol was your 25,000 question. Was it's found in what chemical product?
Yeah. Let me tell. Some people might feel like I'm being a little. Perhaps even arrogant talking about the easiness of the first 10, but it's more that there's a canon of trivia. There's like a set of like trivia knowledge that like appears in every, like whether it's Trivial Pursuit or Jeopardy or Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or It's Academic. Any of these, there's sort of like this central body of questions. And like those acronyms, for example, that was at $50,000. Like those are acronyms that are in, like those are always in trivia questions. Like, so those are just, those are familiar trivia questions that if anybody that plays a lot of trivia or does trivia bar night, like those are things you're going to come across. There's also harder ones, a Millionaire, there's plenty of ones that are harder than that. I'm just pointing out that I got lucky because the $50,000 one, really, that's a kind of familiar trivia that anybody that had a trivia background, trivia pub background, probably had a pretty good shot, at knowing that one.
I'm looking
So anyway, I got that, and you know what? Cy did get $5,000, so I must have promised him 5%. So I remembered the amount and adjusted the percentage, but he did get 5,000. So now,
still not a bad.
Now I seem more miserly, don't I? Well, it's still $5,000, so that part doesn't change. It's $5,000 per day's work. That part
5,000 is not peanuts. Absolutely.
Yes, but I do see a little more stingy now. But so I got me through the 100,000, and then next was the $250,000 question. And I tell you, so my $250,000 question was Sears Roebuck, the company, told that got his company going. I'm pretty sure that was the question.
Yeah. Actually, I have it right here. Retail giant Richard Sears began his career in 1886 when he started a company that sold what? And you had watches, shoes, paint, and farming tools. And you knew this almost on sight.
And those 2 months of grinding preparation, using my autistic superpower to just assimilate knowledge and just sitting in front of, mostly sitting in front of the computer, going through databases of questions, and using the system. I had, as part of that project, I had read summaries of all the Fortune 500 companies, including Sears. And so in that, I remembered in that little blurb that I had read for specifically studying for Millionaire, watches. So 2 months of nonstop studying trivia got me $250,000. And so I'll take that for 2 months of work even now. But, very happy to take $250,000 for 2 months worth of work. So that was the only question on the show that I had learned during that studying. But it was a great one. And
it sure was.
And I celebrated. I celebrated, because I was, not only did I got it right, it was that, I did the right thing. I studied the right stuff, I studied, I studied those damn boring Fortune 500
of course,
and I got one,
Yeah, well, it's an affirmation, right? It's an affirmation of your preparatory ability, of your study ability. It's like you said, it worked.
Yeah, so I was excited and showed my excitement on the show, if I recall.
Oh, you sure did. And you did it many, many times. And I think even as the game went on, you became more and more visibly excited. You were physically celebrating, jumping out of your chair. And it was joyous is the word that comes to mind. And I hope I'm not putting you in any sort of uncomfortable position, but it was pure joy watching you play this game. And celebrating
exuberant because
yes, exuberant, wonderful word for it.
I was exuberant because I had a plan. It was working. I nailed that question, and I knew. My God, I probably had learned it a week before. And there it was, just set up like it just felt like it was just sent right to me. Like a
right,
a low inside fastball. And that was enough money that it would change my life. It wouldn't change my life hugely, but at least now I could plan a way to live a life I wanted to. I would take a low income. I just needed enough money to buy a place. Put something down on a mortgage. Something like that, and that was enough. To have a life. And so I knew that, and I knew I would not lose that. That I would not make a decision because on Millionaire, of course, if you get a question wrong, you do lose it. Or you drop back down to the latest tier.
Right.
But I walked out of the studio like, I'm not going to do anything to lose that $250,000 because that's going to change my life. So yeah, that's why I was so exuberant. I had a dream, and I was living the dream, and the dream felt good.
Amazing. And so now we're on to the $500,000 question.
So I was the last contestant on Friday. So after the $250,000 question, I was fired up and wanted to keep going. I can't tell you. I felt like, my eyes were going to melt steel. I was so confident at that moment, and they pulled the plug because it was the end of the day, the last show of the day.
Right. Get that the time's up horn.
Right. And for me, it's okay. Come back Monday, and first of all, I wasn't planning to stay in New York. Now I got to stay in New York City, all weekend, which is a lot of money. I mean, obviously, I just won a lot of money, but it's very abstract still. And you're like, wait, I got to buy a new hotel, and I really want to stay in a nice one because I don't want to be distracted by anything. I want to study. It was my plan to spend the whole weekend studying, and I wanted to be comfortable, and I don't want to go to the cheapest place I can find. So
right, of course. So wait a second.
I remember being like,
I'm sorry, just for a second, Ogie. So your second episode really was on Monday. It wasn't like the way some shows will say, come back tomorrow, and then tomorrow is 10 minutes later when they film the next episode. You really had the weekend to wait.
I felt like they iced the kicker, or they send in the cooler. Like I'm at gambling like a casino, and they send in the cooler. That's how I was feeling. Like, oh, I had it.
Right.
I had it.
Yeah.
Oh, why'd you do this? Because am I going to be able to get back to that mental space? Because I was so locked in, and I was like, oh, how could they do this to me?
Right.
And so I got to this hotel, and I remember it's funny thinking about it now, but I was like so concerned with the cost because I didn't have a lot of money. I was a student, a grad student, and Boston's super duper expensive, so you just don't have any extra money. And I'm like, if I don't get that $250,000, I'm going to really regret staying here. But, it's a nice, comfortable room, not far from the studio. So I just don't have to think about anything, and I could just be alone and study. But when I got up to the hotel room, I discovered I had PTSD, that post-traumatic stress disorder, because I couldn't stop reliving the moment of getting the $250,000 question correct. That, I saying, A, final answer. Like I couldn't stop doing it, and I couldn't stop reliving it in my mind. And in fact, when I lay down that night to try to go to sleep, I kept jumping up and going, A, final answer.
Wow.
Over like I compulsively, like, and I would relive it. Like it was PTSD. I was like reliving it in Technicolor glory. And I mean,
was it pleasant? Was it a pleasant
it.
recollection? Yeah, I was going to ask if it was.
I was about to say it's a mix. So in that moment, it's transcendent joy, exuberance beyond description. Like, because my life is changing. I came here to change my life. My life is changing. Exuberant. So I felt that, but it was also, I cannot control this. It's like I'm a puppet. Somebody's got my puppet strings on me. Somebody's got puppet strings on me, and I'm a puppet. There's a puppeteer somewhere. Just they keep lifting me out of the bed and making me say this over and over. Like I felt like I was being forced to play a role. That it was a wonderful role, but it was happening against my will, and it was so graphic, Technicolor, and obviously I in no way want to compare PTSD to what a soldier goes through. But I certainly have an understanding and empathy now that I think it happens from just high intensity emotional experiences. Obviously, the one I had, I was fortunate, it was super positive, but like, I get it. It just I relived it,
Sure,
when
sure.
I say relived it, it was like, like it was real. And all that evening, I'm thinking about it now, and it's almost pulling me back in. That whole evening, I couldn't do any work. I couldn't talk to anyone. I just kept reliving it. And then finally, late in the night, I went to sleep. I had a good sleep. And then when I woke up, the PTSD part was gone, and I set to work preparing. And so I had 2 lifelines left, and only one question to answer to get to the $1 million question. So I was feeling confident that with 2 lifelines I'd get to the $1 million question. And so I concentrated all my thought and study on what are they going to ask on the $1 million question. And even though I had a database of questions, not many people see the $1 million question. So there's not a lot of data, not really enough to really make any big claims. But there was one claim, one conclusion, one truth, I guess you could derive from the data. And that was this, that they like to ask questions about American history in the $1 million question. I think like 40 or 50% even of the $1 million questions had been American history, maybe even more. It might have even been higher than that. I remember that was a very high number, and then there was no other pattern past that. The other ones just seemed kind of random. So I spent the entire weekend doing nothing but study American history type questions and trivia, and I hammered it, and during that weekend, I looked at a picture, some kind of engraving or something like that, or some old time painting. I can't of the Boston Tea Party with the ships in the painting. So that went through my consciousness, but it wasn't something I studied. Like I didn't look at it and say, "Oh, I need to memorize this," or look at the names of the ships. But when I was studying, I saw this picture of the Boston Tea Party and the ships, and I looked at it. And that's what happened on the weekend. And so Monday came around. I'm the first contestant, and right off the bat, it's the $500,000 question, and it was that terrible question you already mentioned earlier on the show. Which of the Beatles was not on the telethon, or which one was not? Which was
right.
Not
Who was the only member of the
Lewis.
Beatles to have never performed on a Jerry Lewis Labor Day telethon? And the four Beatles were your choices. Yeah, and you had a lifeline called "Switch the Question," which they had at various points in the run. So you were able to just kick that question out and replace it with another one at the same value.
Yeah, so I didn't even hesitate on that one. I knew there was zero chance, and I didn't even want to try. Like that just was that was the equivalent. Even though it wasn't a factoid question for me, that was the equivalent of one, certainly.
Sure.
And I ditched it. And luckily, I got a fantastic replacement question, but sadly, my emotions again got the better of me, as they did on the $100,000 question about Marilyn Monroe, where I didn't trust my preparation for the Ask the Audience, because so. Why don't you read the question if you have it handy?
I have it right here.
If you got it.
Absolutely. In the 1890s, heroin was introduced commercially to the U.S. by Bayer as a remedy for what ailment? And the choices were stiff joints, high fever, stuffy head, or persistent cough.
So I knew opiates had been used to treat cough. So I shouldn't have hesitated, to choose that as an answer, but I knew opiates had, and I wasn't 100% sure, it was heroin. But that's the sort of thing where if I wasn't feeling emotional, like if I had been in my living room or just at my computer studying, I would not have hesitated to have gone with cough. That I knew opiates was cough. Of course, heroin was an opiate. Of course, then that's got to be the answer. How could that be wrong? That should have been my thinking, is how could that be wrong? But again, I got nervous. The joints was the one that was throwing me off. The one of the choices was joints, and I saw joints, and that's the one that tripped me up. I knew it wasn't the other two. Was it stuffy head and what was the other one?
Stiff joints, high fever, stuffy head, persistent cough.
High fever.
Right.
I knew it wasn't high fever or stuffy head, but I read joints, and it just suddenly was like, oh, maybe they did take heroin for joints. That sounds plausible, and that tripped me up. And that was definitely the emotion coming into play. I regret it so much because I should have just gone with what I knew. But I blew my final lifeline, which was a 50-50. And the great news for me, again, lucky moment, the 50-50 took away the joints, which was the one I was concerned about.
Right.
So
stuffy
even
head
though
and persistent cough were left. Yeah.
Even though in the show I took a while, I just was. My heart was racing. I knew I had got through the question. I knew I got the result I wanted. I knew I was going to choose cough. I was so jacked up. I just wanted to talk things out. I was telling myself, don't jump, don't blow it, don't, just take your time. So
sure.
But yeah, when joints went away, I knew I had it, and I knew I was going to see the $1 million question. And I did. And
now, real quick, just before
you know,
we get to the $1 million question, because I want to talk about this was, in my mind, as it relates to this run of Millionaire, the daytime one, with Meredith Vieira. This to me is just one of the most electrifying moments this show has had, because all the while you're pondering this $500,000 question: is it stuffy head or is it persistent cough? Your wife is sitting behind you. Your wife is in the audience, and she's watching what's happening here. And you apologize to her, and you tell her you're going to go for it. And you can hear the air kind of get let out of the studio. Everybody is sort of on the edge of their seats. Take me to that particular moment. Tell me what was going through your head. Tell me what led you, other than the fact that you knew the answer. That's a huge decision. That's a huge financial decision. Bring me to that moment. Tell me what that was like.
There's another dramatic aspect to that moment too. Let me add to the mix before I answer you, and I want to answer you. I guess a dirty little secret. Maybe you've talked about it before. Maybe other contestants have. But you can hear what the audience says, and for there, when I remember distinctly, that was the first time on the stuffy head versus cough question, where I was in a situation where I was paused and settled enough that I could pay attention to the audience, and you can hear them. And so I kept hearing people whisper, and nobody was whispering, so that added confidence too, to the thing. I mean, I looking back, I probably could have picked that up on the Marilyn Monroe question, but I was too, scared and adrenaline racing too fast for me to think clearly about that or pay attention to that. But yeah, I remember on the $500,000 question I did, but also because I did know the answer. Like I said, I knew opiates, cough, and when they took away joints, I knew I was going to go for it. But yeah. But so anyway, yeah, there's that moment for $500,000 now, and that's real money. Like that's definitely enough to change my life. That's definitely enough to get a place to live, and enough as long as I use it carefully and wisely and patiently, that I won't ever have to have a 9-to-5 job. So yeah, that was crossing that line. Like there, 250,000 maybe at that at that day and age. Yeah, man, inflation's already made those numbers look quite different. But yeah, the $500,000, there was no doubt. Like getting that, for sure, my life is going to be different. And yeah, even though I was sure of the answer, and yeah, it's surreal. I mean, because there's nothing else like that in life, like that you're suddenly just, you make this decision, about some random bit of trivia, and your life is going to be completely different. You're going to be, the rest of your life, you're going to be a different person. And yeah, so even though I was confident of the answer, it's just, there's such a surreal thing to it. Like, oh, I'm about to pass through a veil to a dream world, where I'll be this person that doesn't need a 9-to-5 job. And I can just find a way to live with my autism. And so, yeah, just checking in with my wife in that moment, just trying to get some reality, some connection more than anything. Like, I'm about to pass through the veil. Let's pass through it together.
Sure.
But that is hesitant too, because I get it wrong. She don't want to go through that veil at all.
Well, that's true, right? A lot of other stuff you'll be going through.
So yeah, yeah, it'd be a very different kind of reaction. So
right.
Yeah, that no matter how confident you are, at least for me, even though I was confident, it's so surreal and intense and crazy and wild and then yeah, I passed through it.
Right.
And got to the $1 million question, and yeah, it was amazing, absolutely amazing.
I want you to tell me about the $1 million question. I want you to tell me it in the order in which you remember it. I'm going to stop asking questions for a second. I just want to hear what this moment is like, because there are only so many people in the world who can say that they've reached this particular point of this particular game. So tell me in as many words as you like, what that experience was like to sit there and see the $1 million question?
It was, for me, definitely a spiritual experience, because of what it was in my life and because of what happened when I got there and the nature of the way it happened. And what I mean by all of this is that, as I said, I'm autistic and I can't work. It doesn't work out for me. And well, how am I going to have a life, without finding some way to have a job like that at some point, like, what are my avenues to turn this around, in a acceptable period of time? And there's just not many. But there was this, and yeah, and so that's what I was after. And I had put in hard work. I went at this with everything I had to learn the knowledge base, to have the confidence. I trained with my buddy Cy intensely. Thank God that paid off, and thank God he got some money out of it. And I wanted it, and I did it. And there it was. And I spent the damn weekend studying American history. And I'm from Boston, and there's a Boston question. Now, I'll be honest, Michael Davies chooses the questions, and so I am sure he put that in there for me. Like, in that moment, knowing I'm from Boston and knowing the stakes and liking me, and wanting to have this big millionaire moment, he set me up. Now, he had no way of knowing if I studied or not, but look, hey, he's put his finger on the scale, and thank you, Mr. Davies. Thank you. I love you, my friend.
I'm going to pause you for 1 second. I want to read the question because I want everybody listening to have some sort of frame of reference for what's going through your mind at this moment. This was the $1 million question back in 2006. Which of these ships was not one of the three taken over by colonists during the Boston Tea Party? And your choices were the Eleanor, the Dartmouth, the Beaver, and the William. That was your $1 million question.
I saw it. And again, it felt like this personal moment. Like, there's not many, $1 million questions that could have landed that way. But like Boston and the Tea Party means a lot to me personally. The historic Tea Party in Boston. I like the history of Boston. I've lived in Boston for 35 years. Might even be, almost 35 years. I've lived in Boston now. I love its history. And so the historic Boston Tea Party was always something I appreciated, like learning about. And so it felt very personal, like great. And as I said, I knew I had just seen a picture of the Boston Tea Party with the names of the ships in the picture. And even though I hadn't studied it, I had looked at it, I had read the names. And so it just felt like, oh, this is it. This is my ultimate test here. They're giving me every chance because this is a memory game now. I have to find a way to get into my memory of, yesterday and having looking at that picture and finding the words on that picture. Like, even though I didn't study it, like, this is barely within the realm of possibility, but it is within the realm of possibility. And that's how the $1 million question should be. It shouldn't be something easy. It should be something like this. And I just felt like this is it. This is what it's supposed to be. I've got a shot. I've just got to use all my memory tools. That's who I am. I'm the guy that figured out, how to take my broken memory and make it work. And this is it. And so I used every memory trick I have, and I have a lot. And I thought it was William. It was like the other ones each had a little, the other three, Eleanor, Beaver, Roosevelt, each had a little kick. And I never got anything for William, but like, oh, I didn't trust the audience. How am I going to trust this completely crazy memory trick? Except it's a reliable trick. It's good. I did it. It was my own darn memory. I should have trusted myself. For me, that $1 million question was never ultimately about a memory. It was like just trusting myself like trusting who I am. I mean, this is also why I was spiritual, is because, if I just trusted myself, I would have had the $1 million, because I had this very vague, out of the crazy turmoil of my memory, out of this hurricane, I reached in my hand and pulled out this piece of gold, and I had it in my fingers, and it all was just so almost mystical. It was like, how can I trust this mystical moment, touching William, in my memory of yesterday? Like, how can this be real? And yeah, there was just this moment where I still remember to this day. Like, I went from, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to go for William, to, how can this be real? How can this be, if this is it, I'll be a millionaire. But if I'm fooling myself, if I'm imagining this mystic, retrieval of William, then I'm going down to 25, and it's not just humiliation. I don't have a transformed life anymore. Like, and so like my life's transformed here, but if I fail at this, I lose that. And even though I want that $1 million, and God, I trained for it, and God, here it is. Like, I can't not have my life transformed. I've got to be able to not work.
Sure.
And so that I made that transition in that moment, and that's why it's so spiritual. Sort of this super high. This must sound very abstract, but for me it was just pure emotion, just feeling that, going over that line from like, wow, I trained my memory for this, and they served me the perfect question for my memory tools. I got it. This is it. But like, what the hell am I talking about? Being able to pull this out from that picture. Like, I had never done something like that before, and I'm going to trust it for the first time for $1 million. But yeah, I should have trusted it. And so that's why, yeah, it was just a transcendent spiritual moment for me.
I could absolutely understand that. My moment was for considerably less money than $500,000, but I walked away from a geography question with $15,000. And at that point in my life, I, like you, was in college. I had no money. This was something that happened to me within 2 months of starting college. And it was almost like that number, that 15,000, as I was walking away, as I was on the clock ticked away. And as it got to 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, 0, it's almost like that number became part of my DNA. It was something in me said, I'm going to be hearing this number a lot. I have won $15,000. And it's just, it just, almost
it's a
like
lot of money.
Describing, Ogie. Yeah, it's a lot of money. And but it's like what you're describing, Ogie. It's like it's a spiritual thing where, like, this achievement now becomes part of your fabric. That's at least how I felt.
Yeah. No matter what amount you get to, I mean, like 15,000 is I wish somebody would hand me 15,000.
It was great. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, and it helped a lot at that point in my life, for sure.
Yeah, it marks you. Yeah, I understand completely.
Tell me about what happened after the show. Tell me about, that moment after you leave the chair.
I ended up buying property, which was my goal all along, was to, when I wanted with a place to live with a very low mortgage that I'd be able to afford without having to get, a big job, a 9-to-5 office kind of job. And so that's what I set out to do, and I had enough money to do it. And I got super duper lucky. Again, believe me, if this sounds lucky, I feel like so much else in my life is unlucky. But I got lucky in that I went house hunting just at the dawn of the Great Recession. So I bought property in Boston at like the one and only time property values in Boston ever dipped. So that's when I went, house hunting, and so I got a place at that dip, and then I ended up being okay after that. So transformed my life exactly as I hoped and intended. After that, I had a place to live, and I lived there and had a wonderful time and began my career as a writer. And I wouldn't have been able to pull any of that off without that money. So I was able to create a life for myself with that money, and so I'm just super grateful for it.
Could I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Do you think this is amazing? Do you think your experience on Millionaire and the way you were able to win what you won, do you consider it amazing? Because I can imagine that you might tell the story to a lot of people. And I imagine in the, almost 20 years since your appearance on the show, you've told a lot of people about this adventure, about this win. Do you consider this to be as amazing as perhaps some of the people that you've told? Or does your, or does the fact that you studied, you prepared, make it more of a foregone conclusion in your mind?
As time's gone on, I'm more and more aware of how lucky I was in my run. And, so yes, it was never a foregone conclusion. I mean, I didn't get the $1 million either. And I kind of blew it on the Ask the Audience and the million and the $500,000 question. I could have played those better. So I feel like I because I made mistakes and still got the outcome I got, it's wonderful and I appreciate it and I don't take anything for granted. Just super duper lucky to have gone through it because it did change my life.
Tell Us About Yourself. Conversations with Game Show Contestants is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Christian Carrion, from my studio in beautiful downtown Lancaster City, Pennsylvania. Co-executive producer Cory Anotado. Researcher Chuck Donegan. This has been a production of BuzzerBlog, the most popular game show website in the world, in partnership with the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. For more information, visit museumofplay.org. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Christian Carrion. Good night. Tell Us About Yourself is sponsored by bonusround.ca, streaming Canada's classic game shows on demand. Dive into the golden age of television with thousands of episodes of Canadian series that defined an era from anywhere in the world, all for just $1.99 a month. From iconic shows like Let's Make a Deal and Definition to cult classics like Bumper Stumpers and The Mad Dash, bonusround.ca brings you timeless entertainment that's fun, enlightening, and affordable. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, relive the magic of Canadian television history. Subscribe now at bonusround.ca for $1.99 and turn every night into Game Show Night. By Game Show Forensics. Join host Robert McKee and his crack team of forensic game show scientists as they take you on the deepest dives imaginable in a quest to analyze the most detailed minutia of game shows nobody else dares to, or cares to, investigate. Nothing is too whimsical for examination, no semantics too absurd for the research extremists at GameShowForensics.com. Parental discretion is advised. And by The Inn at Leola Village. Nestled in the heart of picturesque Pennsylvania, The Inn at Leola Village is a sanctuary of luxury and relaxation. Indulge in the timeless beauty of their historic suites, each meticulously designed to transport you to a bygone era of elegance and grace. Experience the culinary delights of their award-winning Italian restaurant, where every dish is a masterpiece crafted from the finest local ingredients. From romantic getaways to corporate retreats, the Inn at Leola Village offers a haven for every occasion. Unwind at the spa, stroll through the lush gardens, and let the stress of everyday life melt away. Make your reservation today at theinnatleolavillage.com or call the front desk at area code 717-656-7002. the Inn at Leola Village, an oasis of luxury.